1. Write the synonyms of the following words. A. Salvation, redemption, deliverance, reclamation. B. Surrender, submit, give in, yield. C. Enhance, improve, boost, amplify, augment. 2. Write the antonyms of the following words. A. Vague, lucid, precise, sharp. B. Weak, robust, sturdy, athletic. C. Artless, crooked, deceptive, suspicious. 3. Use in a sentence of your own. A. Colonial. They bought a colonial-style house near the beach. B. Unstoried. Many unstoried lives start and end in the city. C. Outright. The opposition alleged that the Minster's claims were an outright lie. 1. What is the gift outright? Frost traces the kinship which developed between the colonials and the land they made a living out of. People from England migrated to America and settled there. The land gave them a good life, but they still thought about themselves. As English people, they did not realize that their land of living had become a part of their identity. But at last, they gave themselves fully to the land, making it their nation. 2. Explain the phrase, salvation in surrender. Colonial Americans thought of the land as their possession. They thought that they belonged to England, their birthplace. When they realized that they were weak, they reflected upon the reason and understood that they were holding themselves back from their connection to the land. Frost says that they found salvation in surrendering to their land of living. The people gifted themselves to the nation. It describes how the people strengthened the nation by sacrificing themselves for its sake. They did so with pride. 3. What did the colonists hold back from the land? The colonists held back the connection they felt with the land. The land had made them rich, and supported their descendants. Yet they were thinking of themselves as the subjects of the faraway motherland, the center of the empire. They realized that they were holding themselves back from the land which had made them its possession. 4. Why does the poet make an overt reference to Massachusetts and Virginia? Frost referred to the two places which saw the inception of America from religious and economic sources. Puritan sects, who were persecuted in England, came to America in the ship Mayflower, which landed in Massachusetts. The Revolutionary War started in Massachusetts when London refused to recognize the settler colony's Declaration of Independence. Virginia was the first successful English settlement in America. It was one of the wealthiest commonwealths, using slaves to cultivate cash crops. It served as a symbol of settlers' struggle and victory over the land and its original inhabitants. 1. What is the theme of the poem? The Gift Outright is a poem which exalts how the land and the men shaped each other's destiny. It explains the enormity of the connection between the men and the land which made the nation much bigger than themselves. The colonial history of the nation is summarized in the poem. It is a reminder of the historical, socio-political and religious roots of America. Frost uses America's eventful and varied past to project its possibilities for the future. The history of his native New England is also tangentially mentioned in the poem. 2. How does the poem become a celebration of the American national character? It celebrates the hardships and enterprise of the early white settlers who looked upon the land as their property, a source of profit. Different sources of the inception of the American culture, the historically important places Massachusetts and Virginia are mentioned by the poet. Puritan groups from England aboard the ship Mayflower landed near Plymouth, Massachusetts. They flourished there, creating religious and educational contributions to the land. British colonists overcame many odds to establish Jamestown, their first commonwealth, in 1607. They named the expanded territory Virginia as a tribute to the current monarch, Queen Elizabeth. Turning to cash crops and indentured labor of Africans, they later contributed their wealth to the cause of independence. They freely submitted themselves to the land once they recognized they were not mentally attached to the land which made them. They realized that their land of living was molding them into a different society. Keeping aside their differences, they lived and died to make their new motherland the reputed and competent nation it is today. 3. Describe the change in character of the American people. People from England settled in America due to different reasons. They struggled to establish themselves on the land first and then to derive profits from it. But it was England that they thought of as their homeland. Even when they had been shaped by America, the land of their destiny, they realized that disconnecting themselves from the land which by now had made them its own was the reason of their weakness. Having understood this, they totally submitted themselves to their land of living. Many fought wars, laid down their lives for the land. Many were a part of expanding the land westward. They surrendered their lives to the land, making it a nation with immense potential. 4. How does the poet present the history of colonization? Through the poem. The poet chose the perspective of America as a colony, granting a stable life to those who settled there. For these settlers, the land was prized possession. The Pilgrim Fathers, aboard the ship Mayflower, landed near Plymouth, Massachusetts, forming the first permanent colony in a place called New England. Earlier in 1607, the representatives of the British colonists braved hunger, poor shelter and hostility from indigenous peoples and rampant diseases to finally establish themselves. Tobacco became a profitable crop there, generating wealth, while they built a new life in the land. Their culture was also shaped by their land of living. But the colonists still held on to their British roots even after leaving the country behind years ago. Later they realized that distancing themselves from their connection to the land made them weak. Thus they took pride in the land they owned, the land which made them rich and influential. Others devoted themselves to expand their control over the land by eliminating indigenous people and rival European settlers. They waged wars for the land and died fighting for the land. The people formed the potential of the country. 1. Write a critical appreciation of the poem focusing on its theme, tone and stylistic features. Compare it with any patriotic poem you have studied. Robert Frost's The Gift Outright is an example of his opinion that poetry is simply made of metaphor. The poem, which rose to prominence after being recited at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy, is noted for its commentary of the colonial history of America. The poem presents the people of America as the gift or possession of America, the prestigious nation. The poem is about the interdependence of the nation and its people. It describes how the people who came from elsewhere developed a bond with the land, realized it and submitted themselves to the land which now they proudly called home. They made a gift of deed to the nation out of their lives. Many people laid down their lives in deeds of war on behalf of the nation. The poem is a reminder of the hardships of the colonials and their success. It also depicts their recognition of their dependence on their nation. Moreover, it describes how a sense of national pride came with the recognition. Frost uses antimetable or repeating a phrase in reverse order to drive home the interdependence of the nation and the people. The land was ours before we were the land's, possessing what we still were unpossessed by, possessed by what we now know more possessed. He uses alliteration too. Land of living, forthwith found salvation in surrender. The meter of the poem is iambic pentameter, since unrhymed, becomes blank verse. Compared to Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing, The Gift Outright is more concise and less dramatic. Whitman celebrates the people from various walks of life who make America, while Frost reminds us of the connection between the land and the people. Patriotic fervor is evident in Whitman, even as national pride is very clear in The Gift Outright. A comparison between the two poems compels us to conclude that if Whitman's poem makes use of a broader canvas, Frost's poem briefly expresses similar sentiments. 2. The Gift Outright is a poem which compresses within it the history of America as a nation. Discuss. The Gift Outright reflects Frost's political conviction and his view of the American past. First published in 1942, the poem is most famous for its appearance at John F. Kennedy's inauguration in January 1961. Kennedy later called Frost's work the deepest source of our national strength. The poem explains the poet's concern about the land, which later morphed into a beloved nation. Frost summarizes the way in which the settlers' destiny molded the land's progress into a prestigious nation. Siobhan Phillips observes that the poem focuses on a key American exceptionalist myth, the story of settlement. The land was ours before we were the land's. The poem begins, looking westward to national fulfillment. The conclusion exposes parallel uncertainties of the land, such as she was, such as she would become. Thus it ponders over what was and what is to come. But when we talk about the land in history, the poem leaves out a significant aspect, that of the Native American people, belonging to various tribes. The poem did not mention how brutally they were relegated to reservations, living in poverty and obscurity. Another problematic part of American history, the practice of slavery and racially motivated violence, is also absent in Frost's poem. From this perspective, the poem seems one-sided and limited in its purview of patriotism. This makes clear the poem's racist assumption of a white European landowning we. Its racist ignorance of how the same Europeans worked to eradicate Native American culture is also clear. The systematic racial prejudice which worked to perpetuate slavery and racial segregation of the Black Americans is also absent in the poem's patriotic narrative of history. But the religious and economic forces which shape the national identity of America is clearly delineated in the poem. The legacy of the Pilgrim Fathers of Massachusetts and the wealthy planters of Virginia are honored by mentioning those places. The religious foundation of Massachusetts and the educational excellence are reminded here. Virginia, with its financial support for the drafting of the Constitution and the political heritage of producing presidents, are mentioned as the landmarks in America's progress. But the poem's avoidance of the natives, the slaves who toiled on the land, takes off some of the shine of the concise reminiscence on colonial history.